Although the Korean War was initially between South Korea and North Korea, it saw the involvement of other nations like the Soviet Union and China, who supported North Korea, while the US supported South Korea. Of all the nations that got involved though, the US played a significant role, thanks to their advanced naval forces at the time. What US Navy warships made this possible? Stay with us to find out. The Korean War broke out in 1950 and lasted till 1953, with an armistice between both nations. However, all through the war, the United States had allied with South Korea as part of the United Nations Congress. By this time, the US Navy had sufficient experience and ammunition, having fought in the First and Second World Wars. They deployed hundreds of warships during this war, so we'll have to focus on the most important and active ones during this war. Starting with the Fletcher-class destroyers. This class consists of 175 ships, all built between 1941 and 1945. As a result, they served during World War II, being deployed exclusively in the Pacific Theater of Operations, where they accounted for the sinking of 29 Imperial Japanese Navy submarines. After the war, with 19 lost and 6 severely damaged, the Fletchers were decommissioned and put into reserve until the outbreak of the Korean War. As soon as the war broke out, the US Navy brought these destroyers back into active duty, refitting about 39 of them under Project SCB-74A, which was aimed at reducing the overall main armament of these destroyers. This project also meant that the number of torpedo tubes was reduced, all in an effort to accommodate other weapons. One of these weapons was the Weapon Alpha, which was a naval ahead-throwing anti-submarine rocket launcher that had been designed just a couple of years earlier. Some of the other Fletcher-class destroyers were refitted to carry a forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon called trainable Hedgehogs. These upgrades proved really useful, and the Fletchers were able to play major roles in ensuring South Korea wasn't overcome during the war. The likes of the lead ship, USS Fletcher, provided gunfire support during the war, while destroyers like O'Bannon served as flagships for other battalions, firing on enemy gun emplacements and protecting convoys. They also served as screening carriers and patrol vessels off Korea and Taiwan. While these ships get a lot of credit for their outstanding service during the Second World War and the Korean War, it's important to acknowledge the designers of the class. Back in 1939, the US requested for the design of a class of destroyers which didn't have the flaws of the earlier destroyer leader types, of the Porter and Somers classes. The result was the Fletcher class, which was larger than the earlier designs with improved defensive capacity, like the addition of two 40mm Bofors quadruple mount and 6 20mm Oerlikon dual anti-aircraft guns. They were also much less top-heavy than their predecessors, which made room for additional equipment at any time without requiring major redesigns. These ships could achieve 38 knots thanks to their air-encased steam-producing boilers, two 350-kilowatt steam turbine-driven electrical generators, and a 100-kilowatt emergency diesel generator. Before the addition of the Weapon Alpha and Hedgehogs, the main armament of this class of destroyers was 5 dual-purpose 5-inch 38-caliber guns in single Mk-30 turrets. This was guided by a Mark 37 gunfire control system that included an Mk-12 fire control radar and an Mk-22 height finder linked by a Mark 1A fire control computer and stabilized by a Mark 6 8,500 RPM gyroscope. They also had 10 21-inch torpedo tubes fitted in 2 quintuple mounts amidships, which fit the 21-inch Mark 15 torpedo. They also had the aforementioned anti-aircraft weaponry, which could later be augmented with the removal of the forward set of torpedo tubes to make room for the replacement of 2 amidships with twin 40mm guns with 2 quadruple mountings, making a total of 14. Fletchers were also upgraded to carry 6 twin gun mounts instead of their 7 single 20mm guns. Moving on to the next ships used by the US Navy in the Second World War are the Iowa-class battleships. Like the Fletcher-class ships, the Iowa were commissioned early enough to serve in World War II, although the Iowas only served during the later years of the war. This class of battleships were designed mainly for speed against fast capital ships such as Japanese Kongo-class during the World War, although they later proved useful for so much more in the decades that followed after the war. The 6 ships in this class were designed to have a full load displacement of 57,540 long tons, having a double bottom hull that changes to a triple bottom under the armored citadel, and armored skegs surrounding the inboard shafts. They also featured 8 boilers and 4 sets of double reduction cross-compound geared turbines to provide electricity. Each of the turbine sets drove a single shaft that the ship's total machinery spaces were split into 8 divisions with alternating fire and engine rooms. Iowas also had both high and low pressure turbines in their double expansion engines and were outfitted with 4 screws and 2 inner shafts housed in skegs to smooth the flow of water to the propellers and improve the stern's structural strength. Although the Iowas were initially fitted with SK air search radar and SG surface search radar, they later received upgrades like the SK2 air search radar and the installation of the SP height finder on the main mast. During the heat of the Korean War, these ships received the addition of the more advanced AN-SPS-10 surface search radar and AN-SPS-6 air search radar. This period also saw the addition of the Mark 13 and Mark 25 fire control radars to the Iowa class, making them more efficient. With the Iowa class battleships having very good stability, they were able to carry a lot of guns for their main battery. This included 9 16-inch 50 caliber Mark 7 naval guns, which fired high explosive and armor-piercing shells, with a maximum firing rate of 2 rounds per minute. By the 1950s, these guns had been developed to become the world's largest nuclear artillery, thanks to the adaptation of the W-19 nuclear artillery shell. The Iowas also carried 25-inch 38 caliber Mark 12 guns in 10 Mark 28 Mod 2 enclosed base ring mounts, 80 40mm anti-aircraft guns, and 49 20mm anti-aircraft guns. They had armor protection against shell fire and bombs, with significant underwater protection against torpedoes, with heavily protected main battery turrets. By the time they were commissioned in the 1940s, the Iowa-class battleships had 2 aircraft catapults designed to launch float planes. However, a decade later, during the Korean War, helicopters had replaced float planes, so the ships made use of the Sikorsky HO-3S-1 helicopter instead. We should point out that of the 6 ships in this class, only 4 were able to serve during the Korean War. The class's lead ship, Iowa, was deployed to bombard enemy targets at Songjin, Hyungnam, and Kojo, North Korea, after which she was returned to the US and decommissioned for a couple of decades. USS New Jersey pounded targets at Wonsan, Yangyang, and Kansong, and Wisconsin served 2 tours of duty during the war, assisting South Korea and UN forces by making available call fire support and shelling targets. The youngest ship of the class, Missouri, only served at the end of World War II, so she was able to have more outings during the Korean War, dispatched to the front line in Korea to provide shore bombardment. Next, we'll be taking a look at the Baltimore-class heavy cruisers, which were some of the most lethal and effective ships during the Korean War. This class of 14 heavy cruisers were the first cruisers in the US Navy to be designed without the limitations of the London Naval Treaty, making them more lethal than most of the other cruisers during this era. Of the 14 in the class, only the USS Baltimore, USS Bremerton, USS Helena, USS Los Angeles, USS Pittsburgh, USS Quincy, USS Rochester, USS St. Paul, and USS Toledo served extensively in the Korean War. They were all fast and heavily armored, hence they were deployed to protect the fast aircraft carriers and battle groups from air attack. Some were used for escort missions and coastal bombardment in Korea, while others served as reinforcement fleets in other allied areas of the world during the war. The Baltimore-class cruisers were the same size as the previous Albany and Boston classes, but differed in other aspects. The superstructure of these ships occupied a third of the ship's length and had the 2 funnels instead of the combined 1 thicker funnel of the previous classes. These ships ran on steam power, each having 4 shafts, each with a propeller, shafts turned by 4 steam turbines, and 2 engine rooms. They had way better displacement than their predecessors and could carry up to 2,250 long tons of fuel, putting the maximum range at a cruising speed of 28 kilometers per hour at about 10,000 nautical miles. For the main armament, the Baltimore class had 3 separate turrets, each with 3 Mark 15 8-inch 55 caliber guns. These guns fired a 335-pound shell out to a maximum range of 30,050 yards and had armor-piercing shells which could penetrate 6 inches of armor plating at 20,800 yards. These cruisers also had 12 5-inch 38 caliber guns in 6 twin mounts, 2 of which were located on each side of the superstructure, while the other 2 were behind the main batteries fore and aft. Although the 38 caliber guns could be used against aircraft targets, the Baltimore still had a special light anti-aircraft armament, which included 12 quadruple mounts of Bofors 40mm guns, or 11 quadruple mounts and 2 twin mounts on ships with only one rear aircraft crane. For sensor electronics and radar systems, the Baltimores made use of the SPS-6 combined with an SPS-8 as a height finder during the Korean War. Although these systems were upgraded after the war, they were definitely effective enough to do the job during the war. And there's more. Ships in this class also carried 2 aircraft catapults on the side edges of the aft deck, between which was the roof of an onboard hangar that could accommodate up to 4 aircraft at one time. The hull design of this class would later be used for the development of several other classes of U.S. Navy cruisers, like the Oregon City class, the Des Moines class, and the Sapien class. Lastly, there are the Allen M. Sumner class destroyers, a class of 58 destroyers all built during World War II. It's fair to say that a considerable percentage of warcraft deployed by the U.S. Navy during the Korean War were from this class. USS Blue, USS Bory, USS Bristol, USS Buck, USS O'Brien, USS Laffey, USS Walk, and USS Strong are just a few of the battleships in this class that had outstanding service during the war. Honorable mention, however, goes to the likes of USS Barton, which served in the Korean War as part of the Joint Task Force 77, working as part of a hunter-killer group for operations along the east coast of Korea, and eventually got hit on her number 1 stack by a 4-inch shell from an enemy shore battery. Another is USS De Haven, which was assigned to patrol off the Korean coast, where she served a variety of purposes. From screening ships that evacuated American dependents from Incheon to Yokosuka, to patrolling on blockades, bombarding shore targets, acting as lifeguard and communications, linking ship for airstrikes, and providing call fire support for United Nations troops. De Haven was so successful in her outings that she was awarded the Navy Unit Commendation for her first tour in the Korean War. Another Allen M. Sumner class destroyer, USS Maddox, had similar experience, acting as plane guard and anti-submarine screen for aircraft carriers, carrying out coastal blockade and bombardment duties, and taking part in the siege of Wonsan in April 1952. Generally, the Sumner-class ships were an improvement of the Fletcher class, having 3 twin 5-inch 38 caliber gun mounts replace the Fletcher's 5 single mounts, and new twin rudders for better maneuverability for the ASW work. They had their 5-inch guns guided by a Mark 37 gunfire control system, with a Mark 25 fire control radar linked by a Mark 1A fire control computer, stabilized by a Mark 6 8,500 RPM gyro to protect effective long-range anti-aircraft or anti-surface fire. They also had separate short-range anti-aircraft armament that included 12 40mm guns and 11 20mm guns. They also carried 6 3-inch 50 caliber guns, and by the Korean War, they were fitted with the 2 Hedgehog ASW weapons, 1 depth charge rack, and 6 K-gun depth charge throwers. That's all for this video on the US Navy warships for the Korean War. Check out our channel for similarly exciting videos like this.